Why was the night so quiet? Luna White had always thought of silence as safety. But tonight, inside Forward Operating Base Titan, it felt wrong, like the calm between breaths before a scream. She sat alone in the dim light of the server room, cross-legged on the concrete floor, her laptop open and humming, fingers dancing over code that didn't matter anymore. Out beyond the thin walls of steel and sandbags, soldiers were asleep, the desert wind murmuring through the chain-link fences. Routine, predictable, boring. That's why she'd come here. She wanted boring. For 18 months, Luna had lived in the background of other people's wars. Just another contractor, the quiet IT girl who fixed passwords, repaired comms, and kept networks alive. She perfected invisibility. Oversized hoodie, messy hair, thick glasses she didn't need. No one asked questions, and she gave no answers. Her small, deliberate existence had been a kind of therapy, a way to disappear from the ghosts that followed her home from Afghanistan, Iraq, and the places in between. But silence had a sound when you'd lived in combat, a specific frequency of danger that hummed under your skin before the world broke open. And that hum was back now. Luna's fingers froze over the keyboard. Something outside shifted, not the desert wind, not an animal. A deep, distant thud rolled across the base. Then another. The vibration crept up through the floor and into her bones. Her first instinct wasn't fear, it was muscle memory. The kind that had been drilled into her in boot camp years ago. Assess, locate, react. Before her conscious mind could even process the sound, she was already moving, ducking low, away from windows, calculating distance and direction by feel. Then came the alarm. That high-pitched wail she hadn't heard since the Corps but would never forget. It wasn't a drill. The pattern was clear. Perimeter breach. Luna's chest tightened. She reached for the handheld radio clipped to her workstation, the one she used for IT emergencies, not combat. It came alive with static and panic. Tower 3 is down. Repeat, Tower 3 is down. They're inside the wire, heavy weapons, all personnel to defensive positions. This is not a drill. The voice dissolved into gunfire. Luna exhaled once, a long, steadying breath. Her brain wanted to freeze, but the Marine in her refused. She scanned the small room, one door, one window, one weapons locker in the corner. Technically, the locker belonged to the part-time security guard who rotated night shifts in the server room, but she'd helped install the lock. She knew the code. Her fingers hesitated over the keypad. If she opened it, there was no going back. The door beeped, clicked open. Inside was an M4 carbine, 4 magazines, a sidearm, and a Kevlar vest. She stared at the rifle for several seconds, as if the decision still mattered, as if she could somehow stay who she'd been pretending to be, the quiet contractor, the ghost. But outside, the sound of small arms fire was growing louder, closer. Someone screamed, a sound that stripped away whatever illusions she'd been clinging to. Luna picked up the M4. It fit her hands too easily, too naturally. She checked the chamber, safety, optics, muscle memory, performing a ritual she'd sworn she'd forgotten. The weight of the rifle brought the past roaring back, sand, blood, adrenaline, and that whispering voice that had haunted her ever since she'd left the Marines. You were good at this. Too good. She caught her reflection in the dark screen of a monitor. Messy hair, glasses, hoodie, the costume of invisibility. Luna reached up and pulled the glasses off, tied her hair into a tight tactical bun, stripped off the hoodie. The transformation was quiet, almost ceremonial. The woman staring back at her wasn't the invisible contractor anymore. She was something she'd buried under layers of denial, a Marine infantry specialist who'd once survived firefights that killed everyone else in her unit. The screams outside stopped. That was worse than the sound itself. Silence again, then bursts of gunfire, short, efficient executions. Luna's jaw locked. She keyed the radio to the emergency frequency. Any station, this is White. Server room vicinity. What's your situation? Static, then a voice, rough, scared, familiar. White, get to the bunker. We're being overrun. They hit us with. Gunfire cut him off. Then silence. Luna's breathing slowed. She pressed her back to the door. The red emergency lights flickered to life, painting the hallway in blood-colored shadows. Smoke drifted from somewhere down the corridor. The base was burning, and she was standing in its nervous system. She opened the door and stepped into the hallway. Her movements were automatic now, controlled, efficient, predatory. Every corner was checked, every shadow calculated. She walked away from this life because it had made her into something she didn't recognize. But now she moved like she'd never left. The base that had once been filled with laughter, music, and the smell of instant coffee was now a maze of chaos. Gunfire echoed through the concrete hallways. Over the radio, panicked voices overlapped. They're inside the motor pool. Command post hit. We need medics at Bravo sector. They're everywhere. Luna followed the noise toward the courtyard. Through a narrow window, she caught glimpses of the nightmare outside, tracer rounds cutting through the darkness, towers ablaze, soldiers scrambling from cover to cover. She counted at least 50 enemy fighters, organized, coordinated, not a random assault. They'd known exactly where to hit. Her stomach turned cold. These insurgents weren't just attacking, they were executing a plan. Someone had fed them intelligence about the base. Luna pressed herself against the wall, closed her eyes for half a second, and listened. She could hear boots, voices, not English, a dialect she recognized from her deployments. They were moving through rooms systematically, searching, clearing, killing. 3 sets of footsteps drew closer. Luna positioned herself at the corner, rifle raised. Her heartbeat slowed until it matched her breathing. When the first insurgent stepped into view, she fired 2 controlled bursts, center mass. The second stumbled forward, she shifted, fired again. The third ducked behind the doorway. Luna leaned out, caught a sliver of his shoulder, and fired once more. Silence. She stepped over the bodies, checked each weapon, and pulled an extra magazine from one of their vests. No hesitation, no shaking hands, just the quiet efficiency of someone who'd been here before too many times. The radio came alive again. All personnel, this is command. Enemy forces have breached multiple sectors. Estimate 40 to 50 insurgents inside the wire. All available personnel, mount defense at rally points Alpha and Bravo. Static. Luna pushed forward. Past a half-collapsed wall, she reached a window overlooking the courtyard and froze. Down below, 6 soldiers knelt in a line, hands behind their heads. Around them, 15 insurgents stood with rifles raised. Execution squad. The rest of the attackers moved in the background, reorganizing, shouting orders. Luna's mind split in 2. One part screamed, "You can't save them." The other whispered, "You have to try." She crouched behind a desk near the window, used it as a rest for her rifle, and drew a slow, deliberate breath. Her finger rested lightly on the trigger. Exhale. 2 shots, 2 lives. She sighted the leader, the one giving the orders, and fired. The man dropped before anyone registered the sound. Then she shifted aim to the soldier with an RPG next to the truck. 2 rounds, chest and neck. He collapsed, weapon falling uselessly to the ground. The courtyard erupted into chaos. Insurgents scattered, shouting, firing in every direction. The kneeling soldiers ducked, scrambling for cover. Luna was already moving, repositioning 3 windows down. She fired again, short, rhythmic bursts. 1 insurgent, then another, then another. Within 30 seconds, 8 of the 15 were down. The remaining fighters finally located her muzzle flashes and began firing back, rounds shattering glass, chipping concrete. Luna dropped behind the desk, reloaded, and kept moving. Her cover fire gave the captured soldiers their moment. 3 of them surged forward, tackling their captors. A desperate, chaotic melee unfolded in the courtyard. Luna kept shooting, measured, precise, until her rifle clicked dry. She ejected the mag, reloaded, and looked again. The captives were escaping. One of them, Corporal Davis. She recognized him from the motor pool, had picked up a fallen insurgent's AK-47, and was firing back to cover his squadmates. A massacre had turned into a fighting chance. Luna exhaled shakily, not from fear but from something deeper, that old, dangerous thrill of combat she'd sworn she'd buried. She could almost feel the adrenaline flooding her veins like it used to. Don't lose yourself again, she thought. Not tonight. Movement behind her, fast, heavy boots. She spun, fired. 2 more insurgents down in the doorway. No time to process it, no time to think. Survival had no room for thought. Her radio crackled again, the voice urgent but coherent now. "Whoever's shooting from admin building, keep it up. You're giving us time to regroup. Rally Point Alpha is holding." Luna almost smiled. She wasn't supposed to be part of this fight, but she was changing the tide. She pressed forward through smoke and shattered walls, clearing hallways she'd once walked to deliver network reports. The same corridors now echoed with gunfire and dying breaths. Every step carried weight, not just of survival, but of confrontation with herself. For the first time in 18 months, Luna wasn't hiding behind a screen. She wasn't pretending to be harmless. She was exactly what she'd once promised she'd never be again. A weapon. But there was something she hadn't told anyone, something even she didn't want to admit. She missed it. Not the killing, not the fear, but the clarity. The absolute focus that came when life and death balanced on a trigger pull. The way it silenced everything else, the guilt, the memories, the insomnia. Combat was the only place her mind ever went quiet. And that terrified her more than the enemy outside. Smoke poured through the broken ceiling. Somewhere near the command post, ammunition cooked off in secondary explosions. The base was coming apart. Luna reached the stairwell, boots echoing, M4 low ready, and paused, listening. Footsteps below, voices, enemy. She dropped to one knee, sights down, and waited. The first insurgent appeared. Luna fired, then another, then another. The rest retreated, shouting to regroup. She didn't chase. She moved up, higher ground, better vantage, less chance of being cornered. When she reached the roof, the entire base sprawled before her, chaos illuminated by firelight and tracer rounds. She could see both rally points, the command post, and the open desert beyond the wire. Her heart sank. The attackers weren't retreating. More vehicles were approaching, a truck with a mounted heavy gun, rolling toward the base. She had 3 magazines left. Luna took position behind a ventilation unit, steadied her rifle, and sighted in. The gunner stood tall behind the weapon, firing toward Rally Point Alpha. One clean shot, the man dropped. Luna adjusted, fired at the engine block. Sparks, smoke, flames. The vehicle jerked, stopped. Insurgents scattered in confusion. Her radio flared again. "Unknown friendly, this is Alpha Actual. Your fire's effective, can you identify yourself?" Luna hesitated. If she answered, her cover was gone. The invisible IT girl would vanish forever, but coordination meant survival. She pressed the transmit button. "Rally Point Alpha, this is White, civilian contractor, former Marine Corps infantry. I'm on the admin building roof. I can see most of the base." A long pause, then a voice she recognized, Captain Morrison. "White, as in Luna White, the contractor who fixes our computers." "Affirmative, also former infantry. I've got overwatch on your sectors." "Copy that, White. We'll take any help we can get." Luna nodded to herself, eyes scanning the battlefield. The night wasn't over, not by a long shot. But for the first time since the first explosion, she wasn't just surviving. She was fighting. And somewhere deep inside, beneath the fear and the exhaustion, a part of her she thought had died began to breathe again. What was she doing back here again? The thought came in fragments, disjointed between bursts of gunfire. Luna crouched low behind a shattered air vent, her rifle tight against her shoulder, the night wind whipping her hair loose from its bun. She had chosen a life of silence and code, not muzzle flashes and screams. Yet here she was, the invisible contractor turned phantom defender, perched on a rooftop as chaos unfolded below her. Captain Morrison's voice came through the radio again, clipped but steady despite the static. "White, we've got wounded pinned near Bravo sector. Medics can't reach them. We're trying to consolidate to Alpha, but the courtyard's still hot." Luna adjusted her scope, sweeping across the base. Smoke and dust blurred the world into shifting shades of red and black. The bodies of insurgents she dropped earlier still littered the courtyard like abandoned shadows. But she could see movement, a group of soldiers dragging stretchers under sporadic fire, trying to reach the safety of Rally Point Alpha. She keyed her mic. "I've got eyes on them. 2 enemy positions southeast corner using debris for cover. I can suppress." "Copy that, on your mark." She exhaled slowly. The rifle's reticle drifted over one of the shooters. Her heartbeat slowed. One breath, one squeeze, the insurgent fell. She shifted to the next, fired again, another fell backward into the dust. She wasn't counting kills. She wasn't thinking about what each shot meant. She was protecting those who still had a chance to live. Her radio crackled. "Good shooting, White. Movement secured. We're moving the wounded." Good shooting. She used to hear that all the time, back when medals meant less than the silence that followed them. Luna scanned again, eyes narrowing. The insurgents were adapting. They were good, better trained than she expected. She could see them shifting positions, regrouping, setting up fallback lines. That wasn't normal for local fighters. This was something organized, funded, informed. She watched a team move toward the armory building, the one holding heavier weapons. If they got inside, everything would collapse. She pressed the radio. "Alpha Actual, they're moving on the armory. I count 12, 15 fighters. If they breach that building, they'll have machine guns, RPGs, and explosives." "Copy, White. We're stretched thin here. Can you intercept?" Luna's eyes flicked to the distance between rooftops, 20 meters of open ground under fire. "I can try." "Don't die trying." Luna smiled faintly, the kind of weary smirk soldiers wear when irony hits too close to truth. "No promises." She reloaded, checked her remaining mags, 2 full, 1 half empty. Not ideal. She slung her rifle, took a running start, and leapt from the admin roof to the adjacent structure. Boots hit gravel, rolled, came up ready. Bullets cracked past her shoulder, the sound slicing the air like tearing fabric. She returned short, deliberate bursts, not to kill but to make them duck. Movement was life. Hesitation was death. The armory loomed ahead, a square concrete structure with reinforced windows and a locked roof hatch. Luna sprinted the final meters. A round grazed her sleeve, hot and sharp, but she didn't stop. She hit the hatch, swiped her contractor access card, and prayed the power grid hadn't completely failed. The lock clicked green. She slipped inside. The armory was dimly lit, filled with the heavy, familiar scent of gun, oil, and metal. Her boots echoed softly across the floor. She moved through rows of crates, weapon racks, and scattered debris, M4s, M249s, AT4 launchers, tools of destruction she knew too well. A noise, faint, human, made her freeze. "Who's there?" she whispered. A shape moved in the shadows, weapon up. "Identify yourself." Luna raised her free hand. "Contractor White, coming from the roof access." The voice was tense, disbelieving. "White, the IT tech." She stepped into the dim light. Not exactly. 3 soldiers stood in defensive positions behind stacked crates, one bleeding from the shoulder, another manning a heavy machine gun mounted on a tripod. The third, Specialist Rodriguez, she recognized instantly. He once spent an afternoon complaining to her about the base Wi-Fi. Rodriguez blinked at her, taking in the M4 in her hands, the precision in her stance, the blood and dust streaking her face. "Jesus, you're armed." "Long story," Luna said. "What's your situation?" Rodriguez hesitated, then gestured to the others. 3 of us left. We've been holding this position, but we're low on ammo. They want what's in here, the heavy guns, the launchers. Luna nodded. Then we don't let them have it. She crossed the room, scanned the weapon racks, and found what she was looking for, an M249 light machine gun. She slung it over her shoulder, loaded a belt, and fed it with a familiarity that made the soldiers stare. "We set up overlapping fields of fire," she said, her voice steady, professional. "When they hit the main entrance, I'll light them up. You watch the flanks, keep them guessing." Rodriguez frowned. "You've done this before." Luna didn't look at him. "A few times." Outside, the distant shouts were getting louder. Boots, the scrape of metal, insurgents stacking for breach. Luna positioned herself at the window, rested the M249 on a crate, and sighted down the narrow lane toward the entrance. She could see the RPG team setting up behind a burned-out truck. The leader raised his hand, the universal signal for move. Luna squeezed the trigger. The machine gun thundered, muzzle flashes lighting her face in rhythmic bursts. The RPG team vanished in a mist of dust and debris. Luna shifted aim, walked the fire across the insurgent line. The weapon kicked hard, rhythm steady, every burst deliberate. 5.56 rounds tore through the darkness like judgment. The air filled with smoke, brass, and echoes of war. Rodriguez shouted over the roar. "Holy hell, White, you're mowing them down." "Suppressive fire," she replied flatly. "Not mowing, precision matters." Her voice was calm, detached, too calm. Each squeeze of the trigger should have meant something, but the part of her that used to feel had gone quiet again. That frightened her more than the bullets. Over the radio, Morrison's voice returned, alive with cautious hope. "Whatever you're doing in the armory, keep doing it. Enemy assault's faltering." Luna barely heard him. She saw movement through the smoke, more insurgents advancing from the north, 20 or more, reinforcements. She grabbed the binoculars from the rack beside her and scanned beyond the base perimeter. What she saw made her blood run cold. 2 more trucks, reinforcement columns moving in. The attack wasn't desperate, it was escalating. They weren't here to raid, they were here to take the base. "Alpha Actual," Luna said, her voice low and urgent. "They're bringing in reinforcements. I count 20 to 30 fighters staging north of the wire. This isn't a raid, it's an occupation attempt." "Copy, White, can you slow them down?" "Affirmative, I'll need heavier ordnance." Rodriguez pointed toward the back wall. "AT-4 launchers, crates 2 and 3, take your pick." Luna grabbed one, moved to a cracked window with a clear view of the breach zone. Her hands worked fast, uncap, aim, exhale. She lined up on the largest group near a pickup truck and fired. The launcher bucked, smoke filling the room. Seconds later, a thunderous explosion tore through the desert night. The staging force scattered like startled birds. Luna grabbed a second launcher, adjusted, and fired again. Another explosion, flames, chaos. Her radio buzzed. "Outstanding shot, White. That's one way to cancel reinforcements." She didn't answer. She was already watching the survivors retreat into confusion. The momentary victory was cold comfort. There would always be more. Rodriguez laughed breathlessly, adrenaline in his eyes. "You sure you're just it?" "Mostly," she said. Then her tone shifted, more deliberate. "If they're scattered, now's the time to hit back." Rodriguez blinked. "You mean counterattack? Are you serious?" "Yes, they're disorganized. They lost command structure. If we push from Alpha and flank while they're reeling, we can collapse them." Rodriguez pressed his radio. "Alpha Actual, you hearing this?" "We hear it," Morrison replied. "You're suggesting we go on offense. We're barely holding the line." "If we stay defensive," Luna said, "they'll regroup. Hit harder. We end this now or we die waiting." A long pause followed. She could picture Morrison standing there, torn between doubt and trust. Finally, "All right, White, your call. You signal, we move." She set up 2 machine guns at different windows, one M249, one M240, creating the illusion of multiple firing teams. She tossed spare grenades to the soldiers beside her. Every motion was methodical, purposeful. Years of buried training flowing out like muscle memory she could no longer suppress. All units, Morrison's voice boomed, execute on White's mark, 30 seconds. Luna looked around the room, at the frightened but resolute faces of soldiers, who'd once thought she was invisible. Get ready, she said softly. This is going to get loud. 30 seconds later, the base erupted. Luna unleashed hell from the armory windows, both machine guns roaring in alternating rhythm. To the insurgents outside, it sounded like an entire platoon was firing. They ducked, confused, disoriented, just in time for Morrison's men to surge from Rally Point Alpha, sweeping across the field in a counter-assault. The insurgents tried to split fire, returning shots toward both threats, but coordination collapsed. They fell back, right into Rodriguez's blocking team at the rear. Luna lobbed 2 grenades toward the remaining cluster. The explosions tore through the night. She shifted to the M240, firing longer bursts, cutting through the smoke. Then silence. The kind that follows chaos. Her radio crackled softly. All stations, this is Alpha Actual, base secure. Repeat, base secure. Insurgents neutralized or retreating. Excellent work, everyone. Luna's finger stayed on the trigger a moment too long, even after there was nothing left to shoot at. The room filled with the metallic smell of spent brass. Her body trembled slightly as adrenaline drained away, leaving only exhaustion and that heavy, familiar guilt. Rodriguez approached her slowly. White, you just saved the entire base. She didn't look up. I just did what had to be done. He studied her face. No, you did what nobody else could. She said nothing, just stared at the machine gun smoking in front of her. She had wanted to forget this feeling, the stillness after violence, the clarity before grief. And now it was back, all of it. An hour later, she sat in the command post, uniform still dirty, hoodie tied around her waist. The survivors were exhausted but alive. Morrison was debriefing quietly, his voice steady as he read the casualty reports. Final count, 15 enemy KIA, 8 captured, remainder fled. Our side, 4 KIA, 12 wounded, none critical. He looked at Luna. That's on you, you gave us a fighting chance. Luna didn't answer. She didn't feel like a hero, just a broken machine rebooted for one more mission. Morrison leaned forward, studying her. When you applied for this job, you didn't mention you were a Marine. She met his eyes. It wasn't relevant to IT support. He almost smiled. You just conducted a one-person counterinsurgency. I'd say it's relevant now. Luna looked down at her hands. They were shaking again, not from fear, from memory. I left that life, she said quietly, because I was good at it, too good, and it was killing me from the inside. Morrison's tone softened. You came back to it tonight to save lives. That counts for something. Maybe, Luna said, or maybe it just proves I'll never escape what I am. She looked through the cracked window, out at the burning horizon beyond the wire. The desert wind carried the faint smell of smoke and blood. What am I now, she thought, a protector or just another weapon pretending to be human? The night didn't answer. Only the silence did that same, haunting quiet she could never tell apart from danger. Why did the quiet always come after the victory? Luna sat on the edge of a cot in the command post, her elbows resting on her knees, the M4 across her lap. Around her, the base hummed with the low, weary rhythm of survival. Medics moved between the wounded, radios crackled with situation reports, generators coughed in uneven bursts. The smoke from burnt-out vehicles hung in the air like an accusation. She hadn't slept in 30 hours. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard the echo of automatic fire, saw flashes of faces lit by muzzle bursts, smelled cordite and dust. It wasn't new. It was memory layered on memory, the kind that clings. Captain Morrison walked in, his expression halfway between gratitude and unease. He carried a tablet with the after-action report, though he didn't bother to read it aloud. "Headquarters wants an official statement," he said. "How a civilian contractor single-handedly turned a full assault. They're calling you the ghost of Titan." Luna almost laughed. "Ghosts don't file paperwork." He gave a tired half-smile, then looked at her weapon. "You planning to keep that?" She followed his gaze. "I'll turn it in, eventually." Silence stretched. The weight of what she'd done filled the space between them. He wanted to call her a hero, she could see it, but the word didn't fit in rooms that smelled like blood and diesel. Finally, Morrison said quietly, "I've been in combat 16 years. I've seen soldiers freeze, panic, lose control. You didn't. You moved like someone who's done this 1,000 times." "I have," she replied. "That's not a compliment." He nodded slowly, accepting that there were things about her he couldn't fix or frame in a report. "Get some rest," he said, turning away. "Reinforcements are inbound. Command wants to debrief tomorrow." When he left, the hum of the generator filled the emptiness again. Luna stared at the rifle in her hands. Her reflection shimmered faintly in the gunmetal, tired eyes, streaked with grime. She used to look at her weapon like it was a tool. Tonight it looked more like a mirror. Outside, dawn crept across the desert, painting the sky in pale fire. The light touched the ruins of the base, the collapsed guard tower, the shredded vehicles, the bullet-scarred walls. Everything looked quieter than it should, like the world was pretending nothing had happened. Luna walked out into that silence, stepping over the scars of the night. Each bootprint left a ghost of blood in the dust. She passed soldiers stacking weapons, engineers patching holes, medics whispering prayers over covered bodies. Some of them looked up at her, quick glances, half smiles, nods that said, "We know what you did." She hated it. Respect felt heavier than judgment. By noon, the heat was punishing. She sat in the shadow of the comms tower, sipping warm water from a plastic bottle, trying to pretend the shaking in her hands was from fatigue, not memory. Every time a door slammed, her muscles tensed. Every time a radio popped, her pulse spiked. Her body was still fighting a battle her mind wanted to forget. A familiar voice broke the quiet. "You planning to stay invisible again?" She turned. Corporal Davis, one of the soldiers she'd saved in the courtyard, stood there with a bandaged arm and a grin that didn't quite hide the trauma behind it. "Wasn't planning to be visible in the first place," Luna said. He lowered himself beside her, wincing. "You saved us. I don't think you get to hide after that." "I didn't save anyone, I reacted." "Same thing where I come from." Luna looked away toward the fence line. "You don't understand. Reaction is easy. Living with what comes after, that's the hard part." Davis was quiet for a moment, then said, "Maybe so. But if you hadn't reacted, 6 of us would be dead. So whatever you're fighting inside, it beat the right enemy tonight." She almost smiled. "You're too young to sound that wise." "Trauma accelerates the syllabus," he said, then pushed himself up, giving her a small salute. "You ever need someone to talk to, ma'am, I owe you my life. That's a pretty big tab." When he left, the silence returned, heavier now. Luna's eyes drifted toward the horizon. Somewhere out there, the insurgents who'd fled were regrouping, plotting, recruiting. War didn't end with the last bullet. It just paused to reload. She learned that once. She was learning it again. That night, when the reinforcements finally arrived, armored convoys, medevac helos, the command colonel with his crisp uniform and colder eyes, Luna felt the shift immediately. The quiet of survival was about to become the noise of politics. They summoned her to the command tent. Morrison was already there, standing beside a colonel she didn't recognize and 2 civilians whose suits screamed intelligence agency. The air smelled like coffee and authority. "Ms. White," the colonel began, "we've reviewed your actions during the assault. I'd like to commend your bravery." She cut him off gently. Bravery had nothing to do with it, sir. It was muscle memory and bad timing. One of the civilians, a woman with sharp eyes and a soft voice, leaned forward. Maybe, but muscle memory doesn't win battles alone. You demonstrated initiative, tactical reasoning, and marksmanship far beyond your recorded background. Because my recorded background is incomplete. Morrison stepped in. She was Marine infantry, 4 years, 2 combat deployments. The colonel scrolled through his tablet. That's the public file, but there's another, sealed under classified authorization. Navy Cross recipient attached to Joint Special Operations, multiple commendations. You disappeared after discharge. Luna folded her arms. I became a contractor, I fix computers. Until last night, the woman said. The other civilian, older, grayer, finally spoke. You left because you were good at killing. You didn't want to be that person anymore. Luna met his gaze. That's one way to read it. He nodded slightly, as if confirming something only he understood. We're not here to punish you. Quite the opposite. Your performance proved exactly the kind of operative we need, adaptable, invisible, capable of decisive action under pressure. Morrison frowned. Operative. The colonel folded his hands. We're forming a specialized program, covert operations in denied territories, missions where uniformed soldiers can't go, but where contractors, people who blend in, can. Luna's laugh was short, bitter. So you want me to be a spy who kills people? The woman smiled faintly. We prefer special activities officer. The work would involve intelligence collection, threat interdiction, and when necessary, direct action. I already did that once. It broke me. Morrison stepped closer. Maybe this time it doesn't have to. You'd have support, purpose, control. You decide when and how you fight. Luna looked between them, uniform, suit, authority. All of them trying to recruit the part of her she'd been burying. And if I say no? The colonel's tone was matter of fact. Then you go back to fixing networks, but your cover as harmless is gone. Everyone on this base knows who you are now. You can't unring that bell. The woman added softly, sometimes the only way to control your demons is to give them a job. The tent went quiet. Luna could hear the generators outside, the wind brushing against canvas, the faint clang of tools as engineers rebuilt the perimeter. She said, give me 24 hours. They agreed. That night she walked the perimeter alone, following the line of light poles that still worked. The desert stretched endless and silent beyond the wire. She stopped where the breach had been, the hole the insurgents had poured through, now patched with temporary fencing and sandbags. She knelt there, running her fingers through the disturbed earth. Blood still darkened the sand. She remembered the faces of the men she'd shot, flashes of shock, fear, inevitability. None of them older than 30. She whispered to the emptiness, you chose this, I just responded. But the words felt hollow. She knew better. Every trigger she pulled had been a choice, no matter how necessary. When she finally slept, it was on the floor of the server room, her old sanctuary. The hum of machines filled the air, a mechanical lullaby that reminded her of the life she'd tried to build. She dreamed of gunfire stitched with data streams, of ghosts moving through wires and sand. At dawn she woke, rubbed the grit from her eyes, and stared at the racks of servers glowing softly in the dim light. Machines never judged. They did exactly what they were told until they burned out. She understood them too well. By midday she was back in the command tent. The colonel waited with the 2 civilians. Morrison stood off to the side, arms crossed, watching her carefully. I'll do it, Luna said before anyone could speak, but I have conditions. The colonel raised an eyebrow. Go on. I choose my assignments. I get psychological support. And I don't become a weapon without a conscience. I keep my humanity even when I do inhumane things. The woman smiled faintly. Reasonable. Acceptable, the colonel added. Welcome to the program. Morrison exhaled slowly, a mix of relief and worry. You sure about this? Luna looked at him. No, but I'm done pretending I can erase who I am. Maybe the only way to make peace with the killer in me is to aim her at the right targets. He nodded once. Then God help whoever's on the wrong side of that aim. 6 months later, the world knew her by another name. In a port city halfway across the world, a logistics contractor named Maya Shaw handled shipping manifests and network audits. Quiet, efficient, invisible, exactly the kind of person no one noticed, until she noticed them. She uncovered a weapons smuggling ring supplying insurgent cells. She confirmed it quietly, filed falsified records, and when the timing was right, dismantled the entire network over 72 hours. One warehouse fire, 2 arrests, and 3 bodies found miles apart. The local papers called it coincidence. Intelligence called it success. Luna Maya now called it balance. Because this time she wasn't running from who she was using it. That night as she sat on a rooftop overlooking the port lights, the wind carrying the smell of salt instead of smoke, she allowed herself a rare, small smile. She whispered to the dark, sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. And somewhere in the distance, the world kept turning, unaware that its quietest defender was watching from the shadows, ready to fix whatever broke next, with code or with fire. Why did peace always feel like camouflage? 6 months had passed since Luna White had vanished. On paper, she no longer existed. No social security record, no military file, no contractor badge. In her place was Maya Shaw, logistics technician for a private global shipping firm operating out of a humid coastal port city where cranes moved like mechanical dinosaurs against the skyline. The world here moved slowly like heat thickened the air. Ships came and went, carrying containers filled with goods and secrets. People didn't ask questions. They just stamped forms and kept their heads down. That suited her perfectly. Maya lived in a small apartment above a market, 1 room, 1 window, one life that looked too ordinary to notice. She woke with the sunrise, drank bitter coffee, rode the crowded ferry to work, and spent her days buried in manifests and code. To anyone watching, she was another overqualified woman hiding in spreadsheets. To those who knew, the few who existed behind encrypted channels and classified clearances, she was an asset. The agency called her Sable, her operational alias, field asset for non-standard intelligence operations. That was the clean version. The truth was messier. She was a weapon with plausible deniability. The first assignment had come quietly, disguised as a logistics audit request. The message arrived in her secure inbox 3 months into her new life. No greeting, no signature, just a location, a date, and 1 line of text. Confirm trafficking route and identify handlers. No civilian casualties. Observe until contact authorized. It had felt sterile, cold, the way war used to feel before the shooting started. Now she stood at Dock 47, clipboard in hand, wearing a reflective vest and safety glasses, the kind of uniform that rendered you invisible through banality. Her hair was tied back, her ID badge clipped neatly to her collar. Around her, cranes lifted containers with mechanical rhythm. Forklifts hummed, seagulls screamed, and the salty wind whipped through her hair. She looked like she belonged there because she'd made herself belong there. Luna had always known that invisibility wasn't about hiding. It was about becoming the background so perfectly that no one remembered you'd been there at all. Her earpiece crackled softly with the voice of her handler, a man she knew only as Hale. Calm, professional, detached. Visual confirmation of target convoy. Luna kept her head down, flipping through her clipboard papers like a bored inspector. Negative, she murmured under her breath. Container number mismatch. The shipment from Corin Freight hasn't cleared customs yet. ETA 5 minutes. Remember, eyes only, do not engage. She gave the faintest hint of a smile. Copy. Hale's voice faded into static. She liked that. The space between instructions, it left room for instinct. 5 minutes later, the convoy arrived, 3 flatbed trucks hauling sealed containers marked with agricultural goods. On paper, harmless. In reality, a smuggling front. Luna's job was simple: confirm, report, disappear. But simple and clean, rarely survived contact with reality. She moved through the stacks of containers, scanning barcodes, checking manifests, her fingers brushing over cold steel. Every sound mattered, every footstep, every distant engine. Then she caught it, the metallic click of a latch, not the rhythmic clatter of dock work, a deliberate sound. Someone else was there. Luna paused mid-step, pretending to read her clipboard, eyes flicking sideways. 2 men, mid-30s, plain clothes. One spoke into a phone, the other scanned the area with predatory casualness. Security contractors, but not from the company. Their movements were too synchronized, their eyes too sharp. Her instinct told her to walk away. Her training told her to observe. She moved closer, pretending to take notes. Her radio mic was open now, voice low. 2 unidentified, not dock crew, likely private security tied to convoy. Acknowledged, Hale said. Maintain surveillance only. But one of the men turned and saw her watching. Their eyes met. A flicker of recognition crossed his face, not because he knew her, because he recognized the stance. Shoulders square, weight balanced, not a civilian's posture. He started walking toward her. Luna's brain ran the math instantly: distance to cover, number of potential witnesses, escape vectors. She stepped back, raising her clipboard as if startled. Can I help you? The man smiled, friendly enough to look harmless. Routine inspection. That's right. He stepped closer, uncomfortably close. Strange, we weren't told about one today. Then someone forgot to tell you. His smile didn't reach his eyes. Maybe. The moment stretched. Behind him, the second man's hand moved toward his jacket, a weapon. Luna dropped the clipboard. In the same motion, she grabbed the first man's wrist, twisted, drove her elbow into his sternum, and used his collapsing body as a shield. The second man's suppressed pistol coughed, a whispering thwip that barely broke the noise of the dock. The bullet buried itself in the container beside her. She kicked the first man's legs out, disarmed him, fired once. The second dropped. The echo of violence hung for only a heartbeat before the machinery and seagulls swallowed it whole. Luna knelt quickly, checking the IDs. Fake. Eastern Bloc issue, clean forgeries. The kind used by networks trafficking weapons disguised as humanitarian goods. Hale, she whispered, breath steady. Engagement was forced. 2 hostiles neutralized. Confirmed smuggling personnel. There was a pause before his reply. Understood. Exfil before local security arrives. Debrief at Safe House 47. She stood, brushed the dust from her vest, retrieved her clipboard, and walked away like nothing had happened. No one looked twice. That was the power of invisibility. That night, the safe house lights buzzed faintly overhead as Hale entered, late 40s, lean, efficient. The kind of man who lived entirely in gray areas. He placed a folder on the table between them. Your report checks out. 2 smugglers dead, shipment seized, minimal disruption, clean work. Luna leaned back in her chair. You didn't send backup. Backup compromises the cover. You man me. Hale didn't flinch. You were chosen because you don't need backup. She stared at him, then laughed softly. You know, that's exactly what the Corps used to say before sending us into kill zones. This isn't a kill zone. It's starting to feel like one. He studied her for a moment. You're effective, Sable, efficient, controlled, but you're also volatile. That's not an insult, it's why we recruited you. Volatile, she repeated, tasting the word. That's a polite way to say broken. No, he said, that's a polite way to say human. The silence stretched between them, the kind of silence filled with unspoken truths. Finally, Hale slid the folder toward her. Next assignment, same port network, but this time higher up, the buyers. Luna hesitated. You want me to follow the money? I want you to follow yourself. See how far you're willing to go before the mission stops being about redemption. He left her with that. She opened the file, photographs, a name circled in red, Victor Hallam, arms broker, mid-level, connected to insurgent cells that used Titan as a testing ground. The past was bleeding into her present again. She closed the folder. Of course it's him. For the next 3 weeks, she lived 2 lives, Maya by day, Sable by night. She tracked Hallam through digital breadcrumbs, traced shell companies, intercepted shipments, built a web out of lies and ports and dead drops. Every night she told herself it was just intelligence gathering, observation. But each time she saw another crate of stolen weapons headed for war zones like Titan, she felt the same cold anger building under her ribs. She'd seen what those weapons did to soldiers, to people who believed in something. One evening, while scanning surveillance feeds from a hidden terminal, she spotted Hallam boarding a yacht docked at Pier 19. She keyed her radio. Target confirmed. Meeting with unidentified second party. Recommend interception. Negative, Hale said. Stand down. We have no field assets in range. I'm in range. You're not cleared for engagement. Luna watched as the second man stepped off the yacht's suit, European features, diplomatic credentials, weapons deal wrapped in diplomacy, the kind of thing that always stayed off record. Copy that, she said, but she didn't mean it. She was already moving. By the time Hale realized she'd cut comms, she was halfway across the dock, hood up, pistol holstered beneath her jacket. The night was thick with salt and oil. Music drifted from a party on another vessel, laughter and champagne covering the sound of her footsteps. She moved like smoke. On the yacht, Hallam's voice carried in sharp tones, accented, impatient. Payment first, then we deliver. The routes are secure now. Titan proved the model works. Titan, the word hit her like a trigger pull. She didn't wait for more. She stepped into the open doorway. No, she said quietly. Titan proved what happens when you underestimate the wrong people. Hallam spun. Recognition flared too late. 3 shots, controlled, efficient. He fell without a word. The diplomat's guard reached for his weapon. She fired again. Silence followed. The music from the nearby boat went on, oblivious. Luna exhaled slowly, lowering her pistol. Her heartbeat steadied as the adrenaline ebbed. The stillness afterward felt both holy and hollow. She radioed back in. Target neutralized. Containment required. I'm clean. Sable, Hale's voice was sharp now. You were ordered to observe. Observation complete. There was a long pause, then. We'll debrief at 0700. She knew what that meant, the quiet interrogation, the evaluation, the unspoken question, are you an asset or a liability? That night back in her apartment, Luna sat on the edge of her bed, staring at her hands. They didn't shake anymore. Maybe that was the problem. She crossed the line again, the same one she swore she'd never cross. But this time she didn't feel lost. She felt calm. And that scared her. Because once upon a time, violence had destroyed her. Now it gave her purpose. Somewhere deep inside, Luna White, the woman who'd wanted peace, was watching herself disappear behind the eyes of Sable. And in the whispering dark, she asked the question she already knew the answer to. How many times can you become someone else before you stop existing at all? The room was too white. That was the first thing Luna noticed when they brought her in for the debrief. Not white like purity, white like sterilization. A color designed to erase things, erase emotion, personality, guilt. She sat in the metal chair, wrists resting loosely on the table, eyes fixed on the blank wall opposite her. Behind it, she knew someone was watching, listening, measuring. The door opened. Hale entered carrying a thin folder. He didn't sit immediately. He circled the table once, calm, deliberate, then placed the folder down in front of her. His tone was neutral, too measured to be casual. 3 people dead, he said. No civilian witnesses, no security footage, you cleaned the scene. Luna didn't answer. He slid a photograph across the table. The yacht, floodlit by police boats, bodies covered by sheets. Victor Hallam, Hale continued. The man we were tracking, and the unidentified European national who was supposed to be under diplomatic protection. She met his gaze. He wasn't there for diplomacy. I know, but that doesn't change what it looks like on paper. It looks like the job got done. He sighed softly. You weren't authorized to make that call. She leaned back, the chair creaking. I didn't have time to ask for permission. He was about to move the weapons again. Titan-level shipments, same network. You'd still be writing reports while those containers disappeared into another war zone. Maybe, Hale said evenly. But part of your training, part of your rebuilding was about restraint. Luna's voice was calm, quiet. Restraint doesn't save lives. It just delays the inevitable. He sat finally, hands folded. You're slipping, Sable. She almost smiled. Maybe I was never stable. The silence between them stretched. The hum of the overhead light filled it. Then he said, softer now, you know what scares the people upstairs. Not that you killed a high-value target, not even that you broke orders. It's that you made the decision without hesitation. No noise, no remorse. Her eyes dropped to the table. You think I don't feel it. I think you've learned how not to show it. There's a difference. He pushed the folder toward her. Inside were printed reports, her actions, her results, her kills. Lines of text turning chaos into bullet points. It made the night look simple, clean. You're effective, he said. Maybe too effective. And now the program, watching you more closely than ever. You're becoming a myth in a system that hates anomalies. I'm not a myth, she said. I'm a cleanup function. Exactly, but cleanup functions aren't supposed to think. She looked up at him. For a moment, the mask slipped, exhaustion flickered in her expression, the kind that comes from carrying too many ghosts. Do you ever think about what this does to us? He blinked. What? Turning people into tools, rewriting them until the only part that feels alive is the part that kills. Hale's eyes hardened, though not unkindly. Every day, but I also think about what happens when people like you aren't there to do what's necessary. Luna gave a faint, humorless laugh. That's what they told me in the Marines too. Necessary becomes a convenient excuse for everything. He closed the folder. You're being reassigned. Her posture straightened slightly. Already. Higher priority mission, different theater. Where? Eastern Europe, border region. You'll be inserted as an NGO tech consultant, cyber defense initiative. But the real objective is inside a private facility supplying weapons to rogue states. You're to infiltrate, identify command structure, and extract data. Minimum footprint. Luna nodded slowly. And if extraction goes wrong? Hale looked at her for a long time. You know what happens then. She did. Silence followed. That night, Luna stood on the rooftop of her apartment. The ocean whined cold against her skin. Below, the port lights blinked like tired eyes. She thought about Titan, the screams, the fire, the smell of metal and dust. And about the yacht, how quiet death could sound when you'd accepted it as part of your vocabulary. She whispered to the dark, how much of me is left now? The stars didn't answer. They never did. 2 weeks later, Maya Shaw was gone. In her place stood Lydia Voss, systems engineer for a multinational NGO tasked with cybersecurity training in Eastern Europe. Her new passport was flawless, her accent carefully softened by language coaching. She studied the cover story until it felt like truth. The flight to Krakow was uneventful. The drive east less so, gray fields under gray skies, war still echoing somewhere beyond the horizon. The country looked tired, scarred by years of instability and border conflicts that never officially existed. Her contact met her at a gas station on the edge of a forgotten town. A man named Merck, mid-40s, local fixer, ex-intelligence. He recognized her immediately, though he pretended not to. "You're early," he said, lighting a cigarette. "I prefer it that way." He nodded toward a battered truck. "The facility's 30 kilometers out. Looks like a legitimate tech compound, private R&D, but they're building more than software. Arms prototypes." He exhaled smoke through his nose. "Smuggled schematics, encrypted drives, weapon firmware. Western tech repurposed for black market clients, and someone high up is protecting them." Luna slid her duffel into the truck bed. "Then we'll find out who." The drive was quiet. The road wound through pine forests that swallowed the headlights. Merck spoke little, though she caught him studying her reflection in the window once, the way her posture never fully relaxed, even in stillness. "You were military," he said finally. "I was a lot of things. And now—" She glanced at him. "Now I'm trying not to be one of them." He didn't ask again. They arrived at dawn. The facility was a cluster of concrete buildings surrounded by fences and cameras, modern, sterile, soulless. The kind of place that could be anything. Inside, Luna's credentials cleared instantly. She was led to a workspace filled with rows of terminals and tired technicians. Her assigned supervisor, a thin man with anxious eyes, introduced her to the team. "Lydia Voss, new systems consultant from the NGO initiative. She'll be assisting with our network audits." She smiled politely, shaking hands, nodding every exit and camera angle as she did. The next 48 hours were spent learning the system, mapping the flow of data through hidden subnetworks. It was a perfect operation, legitimate code hiding illegitimate transactions. Each night she stayed late, pretending dedication while decrypting fragments of files she wasn't supposed to see. By the fourth night she found it, a directory buried under layers of fake accounting data. Project Lancer. Inside, encrypted shipment manifests, ballistic telemetry, and a list of buyers that made her blood run cold. The same insurgent factions from Titan. She stared at the screen, pulse steady but mind racing. Someone inside this facility had been feeding weapons to the same networks that had massacred her base. The ghosts had followed her. She copied everything to a secure drive, encrypted it, and was about to close the terminal when she heard footsteps. She turned. A man stood in the doorway, tall, composed, expensive suit. Not a technician. He smiled faintly. "You're working late, Ms. Voss." "Deadlines," she said, forcing an easy tone. He stepped closer, hands in his pockets. "You're not one of my engineers, and yet you seem very interested in files you shouldn't know exist." Her heart slowed. Her body didn't move. "I'm just doing system maintenance. Maybe you should take that up with your admin." "I am the admin," he said softly. He was lying. She could tell by the way he said it, too smooth, too practiced. The silence between them tightened. Finally he said, "Tell me, Ms. Voss, do you believe in redemption?" She blinked. "What?" He smiled. "Because men like me stopped believing in it a long time ago. Men like you pretend it still exists." Then he raised the pistol. Luna moved before the thought finished forming. She stepped inside his aim, grabbed his wrist, twisted, fired once. The shot went through his side, silence but loud enough to echo in her chest. He crumpled, gasping. She caught him as he fell, lowering him quietly to the floor. His blood spread across the tiles like ink. He looked up at her, breath shallow. "You'll never stop it," he whispered. "There's always another buyer, another Titan." Luna's voice was quiet. "Then I'll keep fixing them." He smiled faintly, the kind that comes from bitter truth. You can't fix the world by killing pieces of it. I can try. He went still. For a moment she just knelt there, staring at what she'd done. The room hummed with server noise, indifferent to death. She wiped her hands on her jacket, picked up the secure drive and walked out. Outside, the cold air bit hard. The pine trees swayed against the dawn sky, whispering like ghosts. She radioed Hale. Target neutralized, data secured, facility compromised. Understood, extraction route Bravo, 15 minutes. She could hear something in his tone, not relief, not pride, worry. When she reached the rendezvous point, Hale was waiting beside a black SUV, coat collar turned up against the wind. He didn't speak as she handed him the drive. Finally he said, "Another unsanctioned kill." She looked past him toward the horizon. He drew first. Maybe, but command will see it as escalation. They always do. He studied her for a long time. You're changing, Luna. She almost laughed. No, I'm becoming visible again, that's the problem. He pocketed the drive. There's going to be fallout, maybe suspension, maybe worse. She shrugged. Let them try to erase me. They've been doing it for years. As she turned away, Hale called after her. You keep crossing lines. One day there won't be any left to cross. She paused, half smiling over her shoulder. Then maybe that's when I'll finally stop. When she walked into the trees, the cold wind followed her, carrying whispers that sounded almost like the past repeating itself. The mission was over, the ghosts were. And for the first time, Luna White wondered if redemption was just another word for surviving your own shadow. Why did guilt always arrive after the mission ended? Luna sat in the small debriefing cell, hands clasped loosely in her lap. The metal table in front of her reflected the overhead light like a blade. They hadn't taken her weapon this time. That worried her. It meant they wanted to see if she'd reach for it. 3 days had passed since Eastern Europe. 3 days since the man in the suit had died whispering about redemption. She still saw the look in his eyes, not fear, not rage, just understanding. The kind that stripped excuses bare. Now she was back at headquarters. Another secret building with no name, no signage, buried somewhere between government facilities that pretended not to know each other. She'd been flown in at night, escorted through empty hallways, left alone with her thoughts. When Hale entered, she didn't look up. He placed a small recorder on the table. Standard procedure, he said. Interrogation or evaluation, she asked. Depends on how you answer. He sat opposite her, eyes heavy with fatigue. You're under internal review, again. She smiled faintly. I'm collecting quite the resume. He ignored that. Your report states the target drew first. He did. No witnesses. There never are. He leaned back, folding his hands. You see the problem. Every operation ends the same. No oversight, no confirmation, no remorse. I thought that's why you recruited me, she said quietly. Hale didn't respond immediately. He studied her, as if searching for the person who'd once sat across from him 6 months ago, the one who hesitated before pulling the trigger. He didn't find her. Finally, he said, Command is calling for a psychological evaluation. Mandatory leave until further notice. Luna raised an eyebrow. A vacation for assassins, how thoughtful. It's not optional. She exhaled slowly, staring at the table. I don't break down the way they expect me to, Hale. I don't shake, I don't scream, but that doesn't mean I'm fine. I know, he said softly, that's what scares them. The silence settled again, thick as fog. Then he added, there's more. The data you pulled from the facility, it's incomplete. Someone wiped half the files before your extraction. The buyers, the funding channels gone. Inside job, she murmured. He nodded. Someone in the agency's network is feeding intel to the same groups you've been hunting. So it's not over. No, and you can't touch it. Her eyes lifted. You're telling me to stand down while someone inside our system arms terrorists. I'm telling you to stay alive long enough to do something about it. She looked at him for a long moment, then said, You ever get tired of lying to me? He almost smiled, only when it works. That night she lay in her quarters, a sterile, windowless room that smelled of disinfectant and old regrets. The psychological counselor had offered sedatives. She refused them. She learned long ago that real nightmares waited behind closed eyes. Instead, she sat on the floor, back against the wall, listening to the low hum of the air vents. The white noise reminded her of the server room at Titan. It was almost comforting, almost. At 300 hours, the door beeped. Hale stepped inside quietly, coat draped over one arm. They're grounding you, he said. I noticed. I'm not. She looked up, meaning. He tossed a small encrypted drive onto the bed. Untraceable, pulled from a dead drop 2 hours ago. Same format as the Titan intel. I think our mole resurfaced. She picked it up, turning it over in her hands. You're disobeying orders. Wouldn't be the first time. You'll need to leave tonight, unofficially. She studied him. Why are you doing this? He hesitated, then said, Because I've watched too many people like you burn out in silence. Because command wants control, not truth. And because if I don't help you, I'll be watching the news in a month when they call your death a clerical error. Luna stood, sliding the drive into her jacket pocket. You realize what happens if they trace this back to you. He shrugged, then I'm retired early. She almost smiled. You were never the desk type anyway. Within an hour, she was gone. She traveled light forged documents, one sidearm, the drive. Her route took her through 3 countries in 2 days. Every crossing felt like a heartbeat skipped, every crowd a test of invisibility. The trail led her to a coastal city known for its corruption, where ports handled more contraband than cargo. She took a room above a bakery that never seemed to close, the smell of bread and diesel mixing with salt air. From there, she decrypted the files Hale had given her. What she found made her pulse tighten. The leak wasn't new, it stretched back years. Names she recognized: military suppliers, contractors, former officers. The same network that had armed the insurgents at Titan was now embedded inside her own organization. The ghosts had learned how to wear badges. She stared at the data until the lines blurred. For the first time in a long time, she felt something close to despair. She'd been fighting shadows thinking they were monsters, only to realize the monsters signed her paychecks. She closed her laptop, sat back, and whispered, So this is what redemption costs. Outside, thunder rolled over the bay. The next morning, she followed the money trail to an abandoned shipyard. It was supposed to be empty. It was. 3 SUVs waited near the rusted cranes, men in plain clothes. Their posture screamed military, not local. She counted 7. One stepped forward, speaking through a megaphone. Luna White, he called, voice echoing. You've gone off script. She froze. Nobody should have known her real name. Nobody outside Hale. You think you can fix corruption by yourself, he continued. You were a useful tool, now you're a liability. She raised her hand slowly. You're making a mistake. No, he said, you did. The first shot came from the shadows. She dropped instantly, rolling behind a shipping crate as bullets tore through the air. Concrete chipped beside her. She drew her sidearm, breath steady despite the chaos. They were coordinated, moving in a sweep pattern. Whoever had sent them wasn't improvising, this was an execution. Luna ducked low, scanning her surroundings. A rusted ladder led to the top of a crane. Higher ground. She moved, boots splashing through puddles, every sound amplified by adrenaline. She climbed, fast and silent, rain beginning to fall in cold sheets. At the top, she had a view of the entire yard, 7 men fanning out below, one giving orders through an earpiece. She recognized him. Hale. Her heartbeat faltered. He looked older under the floodlights, rain cutting lines down his face. He spoke into his mic again, calm, precise. Target confirmed. Terminate cleanly. Luna pressed against the railing, mind reeling. For a second she couldn't breathe. Then instinct took over, not rage, not betrayal, just clarity. She fired once. The sniper who had her in his scope fell. The others reacted instantly, opening fire. Sparks lit the rain. She moved along the beam, low and fast, returning shots between thunderclaps. Below, Hale shouted something she couldn't hear. The gunfire drowned his words. When her last magazine emptied, the world was still. 3 bodies down, 2 wounded, 1 vehicle burning, and Hale standing alone under the crane, pistol drawn but lowered. "Enough," he yelled up. "You don't understand." She descended halfway, keeping her weapon trained. "Then make me understand." Rain dripped from her hair, her breath visible in the cold. He lowered the gun. "They were going to kill you, Luna. Command ordered it. They found the drive. I gave them your location before they gave it to someone else. But I came here to stop them, to stop you before they send more. You sold me out to save me. To keep you alive long enough to disappear again." She shook her head slowly. "You should have trusted me." "I did," he said. "That's why I came alone." She scanned the yard. The others were still. He hadn't lied, they were his mess. He stepped closer, gun hanging loosely at his side. "Listen to me. There's no winning this. You take down 1 cell, 3 more grow back. Walk away, go dark. Let the world devour itself for once." Luna's voice was barely above the rain. "I can't. If I walk away, who stops them?" "Nobody," he said, "and maybe that's balance." She stared down at him, and in that instant she saw what war did to men like Hale, the exhaustion, the moral erosion, the acceptance that nothing ever really changed. He was her future if she kept going. She holstered her weapon. "Then I guess I'll die unbalanced." Before he could answer, she turned and ran along the crane's beam, leaping to the adjacent structure. Her boots hit metal with a dull clang. Below, she heard him call her name once, lost in the storm. She didn't look back. Hours later, soaked and shivering, she sat in a train station miles away. The dawn light bled through dirty windows. Around her, commuters sipped coffee, checked phones, lived lives that didn't bleed. She stared at her reflection in the glass, hair plastered to her face, eyes hollow but steady. She whispered to it, "You wanted to fix the world. Now look what you've become." The reflection didn't answer. Her train arrived. She boarded, sat by the window, and closed her eyes. For a moment, the sound of the rails almost drowned the noise inside her head. Almost. But even as the city disappeared behind her, she knew peace was only a layover. Because somewhere out there, another shipment was moving. Another war was beginning. Another version of her was waiting to wake up. And maybe, she thought, that's what redemption really was, not forgiveness but persistence. The willingness to keep trying even when you know you'll fail. She leaned her head against the glass and whispered, barely audible, "Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It just keeps going." She had learned that disappearing wasn't about running. It was about learning how to exist without leaving echoes. 3 months passed, 3 seasons of silence, movement, and ghost names. Luna White was dead again, officially this time. A classified casualty report filed under compromised asset, presumed KIA. No body recovered. No inquiry requested. She had buried her last identity along the Polish border. Now she lived somewhere between anonymity and legend. A small town in northern Greece became her refuge. Whitewashed walls, narrow alleys, fishermen rising before dawn. Her days were quiet, fixing computers for the local school, mending boats in the harbor, sometimes sitting for hours watching the water turn gold with morning light. She was invisible again, but for the first time, she wondered if invisibility was peace or just another prison. Every night she walked the coastline until the stars came out, the only time she allowed her mind to drift back. To Titan, to Hale, to the man in the suit whispering about redemption, to the idea that maybe some lives were meant only to repair damage they didn't cause. But ghosts don't rest easily. One evening, as she locked up her workshop, a child brought her an envelope. "A man said to give this to you," he said in broken English. "He said you'd understand." Her pulse spiked. The handwriting on the front was familiar, precise, military, restrained. Hale. She waited until she was inside her small apartment before opening it. No letter, just a flash drive. She sat at her desk, hesitated for a long moment, then slid it into her old laptop. The screen came alive with a single file. Operation Eclipse, classified level 9. Inside were coordinates, surveillance photos, and one short note typed at the bottom. "They found me. I won't survive long, but this is bigger than Titan. Don't trust the agency. Don't trust me. Finish it your way. H." Her breath caught somewhere between disbelief and inevitability. Hale was alive, or had been, and he'd handed her the key to something worse. She opened the coordinates. A location deep in the Balkans listed as an inactive energy facility. But the satellite images told another story. Perimeter guards, satellite uplinks, thermal signatures underground. Hidden data centers. A private army pretending to be a power plant. She zoomed in, reading the metadata. The timestamps were recent, less than 2 weeks old. They were building something. Luna sat back in her chair, staring at the screen. Every instinct screamed at her to walk away. She'd spent months pretending to be someone new, someone safe. But there it was again, that pulse of unfinished duty, the same thing that had driven her across continents, through fire and blood. "Purpose," she whispered to herself. "You promised you were done." But she was already packing. By the next morning, she traded her name for another passport, her jacket for a field coat, and her small apartment for the road. She traveled light, always had. She left her past behind too many times to count, but somehow it kept following. The journey took her north through forests and forgotten towns, until finally the terrain turned harsh. Mountains stretched like ancient scars across the horizon. When she reached the outer perimeter of the coordinates, it was dusk. Snow drifted lightly, catching in her hair. The facility below looked quiet, but quiet never meant empty. Through her scope, she counted at least 12 guards, more inside. She could see the faint blue glow of screens through reinforced glass, a satellite dish turning slowly toward the sky. She found a small ridge overlooking the compound and set up camp there, just like old times. Only this time, she wasn't following orders. She was chasing ghosts. Over the next 2 nights, she watched. Patterns emerged: guard rotations, power cycles, the shift change at 400. It was clean, disciplined, efficient. Whoever ran this place wasn't sloppy. On the 3rd night, she saw something that froze her blood. A transport truck pulled up to the south gate. 6 men unloaded crates marked with the same insignia she'd seen years ago, Titan's supplier network. The ghosts of her past were still feeding the future. Inside those crates weren't just weapons. They were prototypes. And in one brief moment, when a flashlight beam caught the metal surface, she saw a serial code burned into the side. Lancer OS, AI-guided targeting module. Her worst fear, the weapon she thought she'd destroyed, had evolved. She recorded everything, sent the encrypted footage through a secure relay Hale had once built. She didn't know if it still reached anyone, but she had to try. That night she couldn't sleep. She lay under the stars, wrapped in a blanket, staring at the same sky that used to hang over Titan. What was she fighting for anymore? Justice? Revenge? Or the simple, stubborn belief that someone had to stand between power and the people it crushed? She whispered into the cold, "If I die here, at least it's not for nothing." Before dawn she moved. The infiltration was surgical, quiet, no wasted motion. She slipped through the perimeter fence where the snow covered the sensors, used the shadows like armor, neutralized two guards before they could speak. Her heartbeat was steady, a rhythm she'd learned to trust. Inside, the facility was eerily silent. Humming lights, the smell of ozone and metal. She found the control room within minutes, her fingers working quickly through the access terminal. Encrypted files flashed across the screens. Shipment routes, funding accounts, government seals. She recognized names, senators, CEOs, even the NGO she'd worked for. It wasn't just one organization. It was an ecosystem. And in the center of it all, one name, Directive Hale. Her breath caught. She opened the file. It was a dossier, her dossier. Photos from Titan, field reports, psychological evaluations, and at the bottom, a note in Hale's handwriting. If she survives, she becomes the control, the only asset capable of finishing what we can't. It wasn't betrayal, it was manipulation. Hale hadn't saved her, he'd shaped her. The floor seemed to tilt under her feet. For years, she'd believed she was hunting corruption, but she was part of its design, a mechanism to remove problems without oversight. Her hands trembled for the first time in months. "You used me," she whispered to the empty room. Behind her, a voice said, "We all use each other, Luna." She turned. Hale stood in the doorway, alive, pale, older. His coat was torn, his arm in a sling. He looked like a man running from the machine he'd built. "You set me up," she said, her voice low. "I gave you purpose," he replied. "You were drowning, I gave you something to fight for." "Fight for what, lies?" "For survival," he said quietly. "The agency's gone. It's corporations, now nations built from contracts. The only thing that keeps them in check are people like you." She stepped closer, gun raised. "You made me a weapon. I made you a choice." Rain began to fall outside, tapping against the metal walls. Hale's voice softened. "You can end this, Luna, but not by killing me, not by burning this place down. If you release those files, the whole system collapses, governments, supply chains, everything. Millions of innocent people pay for the truth they didn't ask for." She hesitated. The drive was in her hand, the terminal waiting for confirmation. Upload or destroy. "Then what?" she asked. "Bury it again." He looked at her, eyes filled with something she'd never seen before, regret. Sometimes the only way to fight the machine is to stay inside it long enough to jam the gears. She wanted to believe him, she really did. But she'd spent too long watching men justify corruption as strategy. Luna holstered the gun, stepped toward the terminal and typed one line. "Archive secure, anonymous release." The system processed, green light. It wouldn't destroy everything, but it would expose enough to start a chain reaction, enough to make the right people nervous. When she turned back, Hale was gone. The door hung open, wind howling through it. She stood there for a long time, the glow of the monitors painting her face in cold light. Outside, sirens began to wail in the distance. She exhaled softly, almost like a sigh. "Guess we both finally did the right thing in the wrong way." Then she walked out into the snow. By the time the first response teams reached the facility, she was gone again, another shadow swallowed by the wind. Somewhere beyond the mountains, a woman boarded a freight train heading south, blending into a world that no longer knew her name. The world would spin, politics would adjust, and new wars would begin, but something had shifted. For the first time, people were asking questions they weren't supposed to. And that, she thought, was enough. As the train rumbled through the night, Luna closed her eyes and whispered to herself, "You can't erase what you've become, but you can decide what comes next." The hum of the wheels became her heartbeat again, steady, calm, alive. How do you live when everything you believed in becomes classified? Weeks passed. The snow melted into rivers that carried away the remnants of the world she'd burned. Luna traveled through small towns and borderless spaces, a ghost inside borrowed names. The storm she'd unleashed with the data leak was spreading quietly across the world. Governments denied involvement. Contractors vanished. News anchors spoke in cautious tones, never saying her name but describing her shadow. The insider, the whistle, the weapon that turned on its master. She watched from cafes and bus terminals, faces reflected in the screens, strangers debating justice like it was something they could still afford. Sometimes she caught herself almost smiling, because for once people were asking questions, not enough to change everything, but enough to make silence expensive. She rented a small cabin in the hills above the Adriatic coast, where the world was nothing but salt, pine, and wind. There were no cameras here, no missions, no code names, just the hum of the sea and the ache of being alive. Every morning she walked to the edge of the cliff where the water met the rocks, listening to waves crash like heartbeats. Some days she spoke aloud, softly, as if to the ghost she carried. "I did what you couldn't," she'd say, "but I still don't know if it was right." The silence never judged her. That was the mercy of the ocean. She built a life from fragments, fixing radios for fishermen, trading skills for food, helping an old woman in the village fix her son's phone so he could call home from the army. Little things that didn't make headlines. Little things that mattered anyway. And for a time, it was enough. Until the knock came. It was early morning, the kind of gray light that blurs edges. She opened the door expecting a neighbor. Instead, two figures in civilian clothes stood there, a man and a woman, both wearing the quiet confidence of people who carried hidden weapons. "Lydia Voss?" the man asked, using her latest name. "Not anymore," she replied. He smiled faintly. "Then you're exactly who we're looking for." She didn't invite them in. "If you're here to arrest me, do it quickly." "We're not here to arrest you," the woman said. "We're here to offer a job." Luna stared unamused. "I've retired." The woman's tone didn't change. "You've seen what's happening, the fallout. Half the world's defense network is in chaos. You exposed more than corruption, you exposed vulnerability. Someone filling that void. Someone worse." Luna crossed her arms. "And you want me to clean it up? We want you to train others to do what you did, quietly, ethically." She laughed once, short, bitter. "There's no ethical way to do what I did." The man's eyes softened. "You can keep pretending peace is your punishment, or you can use what you know to stop people who have learned from your mistakes." She hesitated. For a moment the old pull, duty, guilt, purpose rose again. But this time she didn't feel compelled by orders or revenge, only by choice. She glanced past them toward the sea. "If I say no, then we walk away," the woman said. "And we hope someone else is strong enough to stand where you did." They waited. The wind carried the sound of waves against the rocks. Luna's heart felt heavy, not from fear, but from the weight of all she'd already carried. Finally she said quietly, "Give me the details." That afternoon, she sat with them at her small table while they explained. A covert initiative, separate from the agencies, built to monitor illicit arms tech and digital warfare networks. Not soldiers, guardians. Operatives trained to prevent wars instead of fighting them. For the first time in years, the mission didn't sound like a weapon. It sounded like healing. When they left, she walked down to the shoreline, the sun bleeding gold over the horizon. She thought of Hale, the mentor who became her shadow. Of Titan, the place that broke her. Of the woman she used to be, buried under layers of new names. And for a long while she stood there with her eyes closed, letting the wind pull through her hair, salt air stinging her throat. She whispered, "You were right, the machine never stops, but maybe this time I can slow it down." Over the next months, Luna began again. She moved to a coastal training site, hidden, unmarked, carved into cliffs that once held military bunkers. There, a small team gathered, men and women from across the world, some veterans, some analysts, some broken the way she once was. She didn't tell them who she'd been, only what she'd learned. She taught them silence, the kind that listens, not hides. She taught them patience, how hesitation could save more lives than precision ever could. And she taught them the truth she'd earned the hardest way possible. You can't kill your way to peace. You can only protect what's left of it. Her voice carried through the stone corridors, steady and low. The recruits listened. Some didn't understand yet, but they would. Late at night, she often stood outside the bunker, staring at the ocean lights far below, thinking about the lines she'd crossed, the faces she couldn't forget. She didn't pray she'd stopped believing in anything divine long ago, but sometimes she spoke softly into the dark, as if to those still out there fighting unseen wars. "I know what it feels like," she would whisper, "to be invisible, to be necessary, to be lost." Sometimes she thought she could hear a response in the wind, a whisper, faint and forgiving. Months later, during a storm that rattled the coastline, she received one final message. An encrypted file appeared on her system, no sender, no trace. She opened it expecting coordinates or orders. Instead, it was a video. Hale, recorded months before his death. He looked tired, older than she remembered, but his voice was steady. "If you're watching this, you outlived me. Good. You always were too stubborn to die the way they wanted. I told you once that you were human because you were volatile. I was wrong. You're human because you cared even when you shouldn't have. You made the machine bleed. Don't let anyone make you forget that." The recording ended there. Luna sat for a long time, staring at the black screen. Then she smiled faintly, not with joy, but with the quiet understanding that some ghosts weren't there to haunt you, only to remind you of who you were before the world tried to erase it. The next morning, she walked alone to the edge of the cliffs again. The sun was rising through the storm clouds, painting the water in shades of fire and light. She thought about the people who never came back, the ones who never got the chance to start over, the ones whose names didn't fit into the reports. She whispered, "You're still here. Every time I breathe, you're still here." For a long while she stood in silence, eyes closed, face turned toward the wind. Then she said, more to herself than to anyone else, "Maybe redemption isn't about being forgiven. Maybe it's about refusing to forget what it cost." Behind her, the waves crashed like applause from an audience of ghosts. She turned and walked back toward the bunker, toward the recruits waiting for her, toward another day she hadn't expected to survive. And though the world would never know her story, not fully, it didn't matter. Because not every act of heroism makes the news. Some stay hidden, beating quietly under the noise of history. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.